There's a new movie about young George Washington coming out. What do they get right? What do they get wrong? And do they talk about George Washington, the Freemason? We've got the review. Welcome to the Scottish Rite of Freemasonry channel. I'm Maynard Edwards, 33rd degree. As Freemasons, anything having to do with brother George Washington naturally piques our curiosity. So the new movie, Young Washington, from Angel Studios is a movie we are really interested in. Before we go any further though, if you love when Freemasonry intersects with pop culture, this is the right channel for you. So make sure you subscribe and like the video. It really does help us out. If we think of brother George Washington as the first American superhero, this movie is his origin story, and it shows George Washington as a fiercely ambitious and somewhat flawed young man desperate to make a name for himself. We are used to seeing this version of George Washington, the stoic, the elder statesman, the master mason, the dignified gentleman, the general. But this film presents George Washington almost as an adolescent, and he's headstrong, and his sheer inexperience collides pretty spectacularly with the brutal realities of the American frontier. The story opens more or less with the death of Augustine Washington, George's father. George was only about 11 when his father passed. Lawrence Washington, George's older half-brother, steps in to fulfill a somewhat fatherly role for the young Washington. Now, Lawrence is married into a wealthy family, the Fairfax family, and Lawrence's father-in-law, Lord Fairfax, becomes sort of a benefactor to young George Washington and hires him to do some surveying in the Shenandoah Valley. In the film, young George also becomes smitten with young Sally Cary, and through most of the first half of the film, George carries on a kind of courtship by correspondence with Sally. While he's out surveying, George encounters both natives who seem a bit hostile and a French fortification. When he returns to Virginia with this news, he informs Lieutenant Governor Robert Dinwiddie of the French staking their claim in what was largely considered to be British territory. Dinwiddie makes Washington a major in the Virginia militia, pretty well on the spot, and sends George Washington to confront the French in the Ohio Valley and deliver an ultimatum: leave the valley or face the full wrath of His Majesty's army. This whole thing does not go well. And at Jumonville Glen, an errant shot by one of Washington's men sparks a chaotic skirmish that ends with Washington's native allies brutally assassinating a wounded French diplomat. Washington is then forced into a desperate retreat, and he and his men hastily construct Fort Necessity. That fort, from the get-go, is not well positioned, and on July 3rd, 1754, in the pouring rain, the French overwhelm the fort, forcing a humiliating surrender on young George Washington. George then returns to Virginia, humiliated, and he resigns his commission. He also finds out that Sally, the woman he's been pining after for most of the movie, is engaged to George William Fairfax, the son of George's benefactor. George comes quickly to the realization that he has essentially started a war. It would be a war that would eventually become known as the French and Indian War. And this is a jarring period of George Washington's life. And it shows our greatest American hero being easily outmaneuvered by seasoned adversaries. The movie's climax comes with the catastrophic Braddock Expedition of 1755, where Washington, deathly ill with dysentery, miraculously survives heavy crossfire, has 2 horses shot out from under him, and goes to take over command from the mortally wounded General Braddock. Washington essentially transforms a devastating slaughter into a heroic withdrawal. And this moment is seen in the movie as the crucible in which the leadership skills of George Washington are truly forged. Famously, after this battle, George Washington finds bullet holes in his coat and in his hat, and the movie does a good job of showing that, and that is something that absolutely happened. This film is directed and co-written by John Irwin, who produced and directed episodes of the House of David franchise. He also did a bunch of music videos. It stars British actor William Franklin Miller in the title role as young George Washington, Kelsey Grammer as Lord Fairfax, Oscar winner Ben Kingsley as Governor Dinwiddie, and Mary Louise Parker as George's mother, Mary Washington. The performances, they're great. And the cinematography is also excellent. Some of the stunts and the battle scenes, they play a lot like an action movie, and you're really going to enjoy that part of it. It has some really thrilling moments. I mean, it's tough to issue a spoiler alert for a movie that's about a piece of history that's well over 250 years old, but it is really an entertaining movie to watch. Critics are calling out the fact that the film takes some liberties with the actual history. For instance, in the film, George is out surveying for Lord Fairfax with just one other guy. But truth be told, he was more or less an apprentice in a party of professional surveyors, and it was about 7 men. It also makes it look like there was only one surveying expedition when really there were tons of them. Washington actually made over 200 maps. It was quite a thing. In the film, it seems almost like one long expedition, and really it was many expeditions. Also, the film presents Sally Cary as though she has broken young George Washington's heart. But in reality, she was already betrothed to George Fairfax in 1748, which is roughly the time when young George Washington would be introduced to the Fairfax family. So later that year, Sally married George Fairfax, December of 1748. So this idea that George Washington and Sally had this kind of romance going on isn't exactly true. Now, in full disclosure, there are many historians who believe that George Washington had a lifelong crush on Sally Cary, but the movie makes it out to be more than what it was, like it was an actual failed romance, and that's not really the truth. They shared flirtatious letters throughout the whole of their lives, and again, she may have been Washington's great unrequited love, but the way it plays out in the movie isn't totally accurate. Also, George Fairfax is presented very briefly and almost as a rival to young George Washington. In reality, Fairfax, he went on many of the surveying expeditions with George Washington, and the two were very close friends until the Revolutionary War, when Fairfax moved to England. He was a loyalist, and he went there for some land grants that were given to him and his family in England. So that part of it, their relationship, is not really touched on, but he's seen sort of as a rival for the affections of Sally, and that just wasn't the case. There are also some places where the film timeline and the historical timeline really kind of slip past each other. But here is the thing that you have to realize. This is not a documentary. This is a movie. So job number one of a movie is to be entertaining. And rule number one of being entertaining is you're not going to be able to include every single historical detail. Some things are going to have to be left out. You're going to have to mash a few things together to create a story that will work in a 2-hour time period and get people to sit still and eat popcorn. Young Washington does an excellent job of that. I think, too, the movie also creates an image of George Washington that we're really not used to seeing. We are used to this ideal character. This is the kind of American we all want to grow up and be. But young George Washington is flawed. He is ambitious. He makes lots of mistakes. He's got a huge ego. He's got a stubborn streak. And this version of our first American superhero is a lot more relatable, in my opinion, than the guy who we see on the front of the dollar bill. Angel Studios is an independent entertainment and media company, and their success comes from their Angel Guild. This is an online community essentially of individual sponsors. They've got 2.7 million members at last count, and all of those members get to vote directly on which projects get greenlit and distributed. So this is a real audience-driven project, as are all of their movies. And most of their movies are what I would consider to be family-friendly. So these are things that you can watch with the kids. Young Washington opens exclusively in theaters on July 3rd, and tickets are available now for pre-sale all over. After the theatrical run, the movie will be available at Angel Studios, which we have linked above. And these guys are not paying us or anything like that, but we really thought that anybody making movies about American history, in particular about a Masonic brother as important as George Washington obviously is, well, as Freemasons, this is something that we need to support. And speaking of Freemasons, here's our big final question. Do they mention that George Washington was a Freemason in the film? Sadly, they do not. And this is disappointing because George Washington was initiated as an entered apprentice at Fredericksburg Lodge number 4 on November 4th, 1752. He was passed to the degree of Fellowcraft on March 3rd, 1753, and raised to the sublime degree of Master Mason on August 4th, 1753. This timeline sits directly in the crosshairs of the film's events. It's less than a year after he is raised as a Master Mason that he suffers that humiliating defeat at Fort Necessity. That was July 4th, 1754. But again, they can't include everything. So as a Freemason, I am definitely disappointed that there wasn't even a passing mention of George Washington, the Freemason. But as a moviegoer, I absolutely get it. Some things have to be left out, and sadly, they left out the fact that he was indeed a Freemason. Young Washington by Angel Studios is absolutely worth seeing in the theater. It opens July 3rd, which means it might make a great addition to your July 4th weekend celebration. If it's raining near you and you want to do something indoors, go check it out. It's playing everywhere beginning July 3rd. It's a lot of fun to watch. The performances are good. The cinematography is great. And the history is close enough to give you a real sense of what young Washington would have been like. He's flawed. He's ambitious. But he does grow up to become the George Washington who is our brother that we know and love. I'm Maynard Edwards, 33rd Degree. Don't forget to subscribe, and we will catch you next time.